Mel and Will were accompanying their son Mark as he headed off to begin his freshman year at State University. The university was located more than 4 hours away from their home, and they had rented a van to transport all the belongings Mark thought he would need. At nearly 18, Mark had lived at home his entire life, navigating a challenging family dynamic shaped by his mother's infidelity, which had deeply strained his parents' relationship. Mark's older sister, Sherry, had already left for her junior year at a small liberal arts college. With her own car and an off-campus apartment, Sherry visited during vacations but spent little time at home during the summers, as she worked in Pennsylvania for the past 2 years. Her absence meant she was not around much to help Mark cope with the family crisis. During Mark's junior year of high school, tension dominated the household. For a long period, Will lived in the basement apartment, and the couple barely acknowledged each other. Communication between them was practically non-existent. Mark had gradually adjusted to the cold detachment between his parents, but eventually, things improved. Will returned to the master bedroom, and they began having sex again. Dinners became less fraught, and for nearly a year the household felt more harmonious, perhaps even better than before the betrayal. However, by the time Mark was preparing to leave for college, the atmosphere at home had worsened. Though his parents still shared a bed and were intimate, the warmth and connection between them had vanished. A strained cheerfulness replaced genuine interaction. The drive to the university mirrored this dynamic. Forced joviality interspersed with long stretches of silence. Upon arriving at the dormitory, Will helped Mark haul the heavy luggage into the building. As they experimented with different arrangements for the furniture and closet, the mood lightened, bringing some levity to the day. Once they settled on a layout, they met Mark's roommate, Brian, and his family. The two young men seemed to hit it off immediately. Both were tech enthusiasts, but Brian stood out with his tall, blonde, heartthrob appearance, a stark contrast to Mark's more average look. Despite their differences, they seemed to connect easily. When Mel and Will suggested going out for an early dinner, Mark declined. Though his parents had reserved a hotel room near campus with plans to dine at a nice restaurant, Mark didn't want to endure their strained conversation and opted to stay in the dorm. He waved them off, feeling a mix of sadness and relief, determined to make the upcoming year a productive and fulfilling one. That evening, Mel and Will went ahead with their dinner plans. The restaurant lived up to their expectations, with excellent food and wine, though conversation remained sparse. The meal ended without dessert, and they headed back to their hotel room. Once there, each took a turn showering. After Will finished and sat on the bed in his underwear, Mel approached him naked, sliding onto his lap with a playful smile. "I need a distraction. Something fun to take my mind off all this," she said. Will chuckled. "We're good at that," he replied, and they proceeded to make love twice, with a 40-minute break in between. The following morning, they set out on the return trip. Conversation was minimal during the drive, the silence only broken when Mel asked, "Is this it?" Will nodded, responding, "We just don't know if things will ever truly be okay." Mel hesitated before replying, "We'll wait until Christmas to tell them." Then, after a pause, she added, "You killed Robert." Will didn't answer but smiled in the way he always did whenever the subject crossed his mind. A few moments later, Mel spoke again, her voice wavering. "It took me a long time to realize you were actually capable of doing it. Even when you said you would, even when I knew you could. I told him you'd walk away." She suddenly burst into tears. Will remained calm, saying, "I found, without commenting on whether your insight is accurate, that most people struggle to grasp the concept of true evil." Mel gasped. "You're not evil, Will." "I know," he replied. "I'm not. But surely you've thought about this deeply. If what you're suggesting is true, why would I have done it if it wasn't out of pure malice?" The conversation halted as Will pulled the car into the driveway. Without further words, they carried their belongings into the house. For lunch, Will made sandwiches, which they ate together in the kitchen before retreating to separate parts of the house to work remotely. Will had converted his basement apartment into a home office, a space where he could escape from Mel when needed. Later that evening, he prepared pizza and salad for dinner. As they ate, Mel remarked, "Damn, I'll never find anyone who can cook like you." Will smirked. Well, I enjoy cooking. Maybe I'll write a cookbook someday and give you a copy so you can manage on your own. Then, after a pause, he added, actually, I'd sell you a copy. Might make a good Christmas gift. They shared a laugh before heading to bed. Though they lay side by side in the king-sized bed, they never touched each other. The next morning, as Mel ate her cereal, she suddenly stopped mid-chew. You did it to save the marriage, didn't you? She asked, staring intently at Will. He met her gaze, saying calmly, if I did, and that was my reason, it clearly didn't work. She continued, her voice breaking, if he were alive somewhere, you'd never have been able to relax with me. So, you went through with what you promised, Mel said. Will replied, I said that to stop you. It was a weak attempt and I feel guilty about it. I could have done more. She stared at him intently. I could have come to Pittsburgh and confronted you over dinner. What would you have done then? He shrugged. I'm not sure, he admitted honestly. If you had barged in and tried to leave with him, he wouldn't have made it out the door alive. You'd have ended up raising the kids on your own. But you didn't go. Have you thought about that? She looked at him quietly. I think our marriage was irreparably changed the first time you hooked up with that guy. He continued. Even if you hadn't gone through with it that night. Even if I had somehow managed to stop you. Our love was poisoned, slowly and surely. After a long silence, she said, it's like something out of a Greek tragedy. He nodded. Are you going to contest the divorce? He asked. No, she said. Once I started believing you'd killed him, well, I tried to keep going, but it made you angry. Worse, it terrified me. Every time I thought about it, I'd get this chill, like something sinister creeping in. It made me afraid of you. And over time, we stopped being friends. We drifted apart. She paused, then continued, I tried. But in the end, it didn't matter. Whether he's dead or alive, he'll always be the highlight of your life as a woman. It ate away at me, knowing you could do that to all of us. Just for sex. She wiped her eyes. Well, here we are. You'll be served at work tomorrow. She cried, but Will didn't. On a chilly Sunday evening, Robert was walking back to his apartment from his favorite restaurant. He'd completely forgotten about Mel. Despite the cold wind, he decided to walk. He enjoyed trekking through the trees and bushes, especially in the dark, when every shadow heightened his alertness. After all, anything could happen, and that night it did. He felt a sudden grip on his neck. Then, nothing. Will had been waiting in his carefully chosen hiding spot along the path, watching as Robert passed by. Dressed in black camouflage, he was nearly invisible. As Robert moved 10 feet ahead, Will stepped out silently, glanced around to make sure the coast was clear, and pounced. Straddling Robert's back, he plunged a syringe into the man's neck. Robert struggled briefly before going limp. Will dragged the unconscious body off the path and stuffed it into a black body bag. Lifting the bundle, he carried it down a small hill to a service road near a quiet glass factory. With no one in sight, he shoved the bag into the back seat of his truck and pulled a cover over it. Sliding into the driver's seat, he started the engine and headed south. 90 minutes later, Will turned onto a dirt road in rural Pennsylvania. He navigated a series of back roads to an abandoned mine he'd scouted thoroughly beforehand. 50 yards from the road, he reached the mine's entrance, carried the body bag inside, and secured the wooden barrier behind him. Turning on a lantern, he unzipped the bag and shone the light on Robert's face. Robert stirred as water splashed on his face. Groggy and nauseous, he blinked against the harsh light, thinking he might be in a hospital. When the light dimmed, he saw a man wearing a mask standing over him. I have money, Robert mumbled, though the words were barely intelligible. Will didn't respond, waiting for Robert to regain full consciousness. His hands tied behind his back, Robert posed no immediate threat. After a few moments, Robert's words became clearer. What do you want? I have money. Will removed his mask. All of this, he said, gesturing around, will eventually return to the state. It's a shame, considering the effort involved. Robert's eyes focused on him and recognition dawned. Mel's little toady, he sneered, his nose wrinkling. Will saw panic flood Robert's face. A sickening wave of terror. Smiling coldly, Will said, "She warned you. Told you I'd kill you if you touched her. And you were dumb enough not to listen." Robert managed to sputter, "You won't get away with this. I'm a big shot. People will come looking for me." Still smiling, Will replied, "This mine is 75 feet deep. They'll never find you. Besides, you've got no family. No one who actually cares." He paused. "Tell me, was she worth it?" Robert shook his head weakly. "No, I'm sorry." "Too late for apologies," Will said. "Time to die." Robert shouted, "No." But Will flipped him onto his back and swiftly slit his throat with a large knife. As blood poured out and Robert choked, Will shoved his body over the edge of the mine shaft. He listened as it hit the sides a few times, followed by a faint splash at the bottom. Will tossed the knife and his gloves into the shaft, then covered the opening with plywood. Securing the mine entrance, he walked back to his truck and drove away. Took him an hour to reach his cabin. There, he washed his clothes, showered, and went to bed. As the divorce neared finalization, Will often reflected on Mel's words about why he'd killed Robert, to save their marriage by eliminating the threat. Letting her believe that almost felt like an act of love, as if he'd done it for her. Perhaps at some point that thought had crossed his mind. But deep down, Will knew the real reason. And every time he remembered that night, he couldn't help but smile.